Well, today we will be hearing from brilliant speakers who are active in the peace movement. And today we will talk a little bit about NATO, its existence, and what can we do about NATO. So NATO last year had a summit, the first Youth Summit of NATO. It was back in November 9, 2020. And essentially NATO started to tackle young people because NATO realizes that they are an essential and a fundamental part for the existence of NATO. If NATO doesn't start to get involved young people, probably this alliance is gonna end soon. So as a strategy, they have picked up 14 young professionals from across the alliance, and they were named as NATO 2030 Young Leaders. So the idea of these 14 young leaders is to send recommendations to the Secretary-General about how NATO should address or start to tackle young generations. In the new agenda that NATO has launched, called the NATO 2030 Agenda, there are a couple of initiatives that are aiming to tackle young people. And one of the main ideas is to create a NATO university. So this NATO university will be designed for youth from the members of NATO to attend university, to win scholarships and start programs to indoctrinate young people on this false narrative of militarized security. So we as well see that the NATO is currently creating tensions now with Russia, and the president Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine is urging NATO to speed a path towards membership for NATO. And if Ukraine adds to NATO, NATO will have a legitimate, legitimate way to start the incursion and the invasion of Ukraine, and that will bring more conflict to that region and more tensions with Russia. So that's why it becomes more and more important for young people to start to think about NATO critically and start to think on ways to abolish this alliance, which personally I think should have abolished once World War II, once the Cold War was ended, because the purpose of NATO is not sustainable anymore. So today we will hear from these speakers a little bit about what they think about NATO, their countries, the countries where they are, which are all countries across the alliance, and we will hear about their thoughts about it. So the first question, I will ask please to every speaker to introduce himself or herself before starting to speak, please. And before we start, we just want to let you know that this is being recorded and in streaming live in the International Peace Bureau Facebook page. So if you do not want to appear, you are free to turn off your camera. That's absolutely fine. Also, there might be some journalists here who might be taking notes about what the speakers say. So just for you to be aware of that. So let's get started. The first question for all the speakers is, what do you think about NATO generally? And do you think NATO is still necessary for your country? So I want to start listening first, Lucy, about this.
Hi, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Lucy. I'm here on behalf of the Youth and Student branch of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament in the United Kingdom. So because I'm coming from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, I'm going to focus my comments today on nuclear weapons, although that's obviously very much only one facet of NATO and its relationship with the UK. So nuclear deterrence is, in NATO's own words, a core component of NATO's overall capabilities. 150 bombs, the number of US NATO-assigned B-61 nuclear bombs stationed in 5 countries across Europe, is around the same number which research by the Red Cross states would be enough to constitute a limited nuclear war. What they actually mean by this is untold destruction and then 1.3 degrees of global cooling, which would cause a major famine with the potential to starve around 1 billion people. 3 of the countries where these nuclear weapons are stationed have called for US weapons to be removed from their soil. None of them have succeeded. The foisting of nuclear arms on non-nuclear armed states is in violation of the spirit of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and in violation of what those countries themselves want. In the UK, our relatively small nuclear stockpile, which is still far enough to endanger everything on the planet, has been assigned to NATO since the 1960s. Trident, our government's nuclear programme, is often called independent. That's always seen as in its favour. British nuclear weapons, which can only ever be used in specifically British interests. But if they're assigned to NATO, that's not actually true because our nuclear weapons can be roped in for any other NATO-decided conflicts. NATO is a hugely undemocratic place to uncritically assign 2% of our national income. Recently, the Conservative government published an integrated review of defence and foreign policy, which at once cut funding for international development and increased the cap on our nuclear stockpile by more than 40%. It's interesting that in this review, the language was lifted pretty much directly from the NATO playbook when talking about nuclear stockpiles to preserve peace, prevent coercion, and deter aggression. As the UK leaves the EU, it's aligning itself ever more closely with a nuclear armed alliance instead. I don't think that the merging of nuclear policies and language is in the interests of our democracy, and I certainly don't agree with the sentiment. You can't prevent coercion with nuclear weapons. They are coercion. This increase on the cap on our nuclear stockpile is obviously in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but that's not exactly surprising from a member of a nuclear alliance which claims to be against proliferation, but only really displays this as a value when it's non-NATO states trying to create or build up a stockpile. We're very hot on telling Iran or North Korea that non-proliferation is a priority, but not very quick off the mark to apply that principle to ourselves. This needs to include a discussion about vertical proliferation, building up our technical capabilities and making our stockpiles more lethal and usable, as well as horizontal proliferation, which is more countries getting nuclear weapons. But at the heart of the nuclear question with NATO, there's not actually any of these things, the astronomical cost or the democratic complications or even the oppositional language which is used to throw up walls between nations. It's a humanitarian question, and I think we often lose sight of this amid the technical discussion about deterrence theory and cost and democracy, and we need to put it back at the heart of our campaigning. Is it right that any nation or alliance has the capability to destroy life on Earth in the most horrific and painful way? That instead of pouring money into support for survivors of nuclear testing or environmental renewal or healthcare, we pour it into weapons that are so dangerous that they can cause death and health problems for decades? The point isn't that we don't want to use them, it's that by keeping them, we threaten to use them every day. Peace is not peace when it functions solely on the threat of burning, on the threat of a war crime. It's time for NATO, at the very least, to commit to nuclear non-proliferation amongst its members. And it's time for all nuclear armed states, NATO and non-NATO, to take active steps towards disarming their stockpiles.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Completely agree with what you've been said, or you've been saying is quite important there. I'd like now to hear from Lucas.
Hi, my name is Lucas Wörl. I'm the co-chair of the international network No to War, No to NATO. I'm based in Germany, and I'm also involved in the German peace movement in different organizations that I'm working for in different campaigns. For me, it is quite easy to say what NATO is. It's one of the largest obstacles to peace. It's a main driver for militarism. When you look at the CPRI numbers, the new ones will arrive next Monday for 2020. So the most up-to-date numbers are of 2019. There's 1,917 billion US dollars spent on military arms. And out of this total, NATO spends a little more than 1,000 billion, sorry. So more than half. And weapons are made to be used. Nobody builds weapons just to have them. So for me, this is a clear sign that there's a huge confrontation by NATO towards the rest of the world by spending so much money on militaristic or military items. NATO sees security as purely military security. It's a military alliance, nothing else. So once NATO expanded from a defense organization to a global operating organization with out of area, they also took a look at different security scenarios. So they expanded from defense, which I see as there are tanks coming to Germany. We have to stop them. There's an invasion coming, to cybersecurity, to terrorism, to climate, to migration, to women, to democracy. So it's a really blurry list of items that NATO sees as a military security challenge to them, that they want to develop answers to. So this, I think, is also really, really dangerous, because most of the problems in this world do not derive from militarism, but from injustice, lack of economic growth, of opportunity, and so on, of racism, of enemy images that are produced, and NATO is feeding into this and reproducing all of this. When you look, Angelo mentioned the Ukraine. In recent, I think yesterday, Putin stopped the Russian maneuvers in Germany. There was a huge report for a long time about them, that a really large number of Russian military was moved to the western border of Russia, so to the Ukraine. There was a huge outrage about this, but last year, the largest military maneuver after the Second World War started in Europe. It's NATO Defender Europe. There were 37,000 troops involved from almost 20 NATO states. And the maneuver was a mobilization scenario to move 30,007 troops to the border of Russia. So nobody was outraged about this. So I think there's also a really biased media and a really blurry and biased picture how NATO sees itself, and how NATO sees, or who NATO identifies as an aggressor. They clearly don't see that they are also an aggressor. Maybe on Germany, on the nuclear weapons issue, Germany is a nuclear sharing country within NATO. So we have about 20 US nuclear weapons based in Büchel in Germany. And I don't want to add a lot to Lucy's wonderful presentation, but I want to highlight one thing. You know, NATO presents itself as being very, very democratic and, you know, so to say, an organization of the democratic civilized world, you know, just as keywords. But they have a first use policy of nuclear weapons, and nuclear weapons are the most undemocratic item I can think of. You know, it's not the parliament who decides about the use of nuclear weapons. It's one person, the President of the United States of America, and everybody else has to follow his, or maybe at one point her lead. And so NATO in its core is a nuclear alliance and relies on these horrible weapons. And so they cannot call for themselves to be a democratic organization. That's just not true. So for me, it's important to overcome NATO and to think of ways what could replace NATO, or how we can establish real security for the people in a non-militaristic way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucas. So now I'd like to hear from Vanessa, please.
Thank you, Angelo, and to our other panelists. It's great to be on here with you today. My name is Vanessa Lantain, and I'm the National Coordinator at the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. And I am here to say that NATO is no longer relevant to the world's current and emerging threats, and that the ideology of NATO is flawed and only contributes to more suffering. Looking at Canada's lackluster peace leadership efforts within the alliance and looking at our own current problems within the military, it's clear that NATO is not good for Canada, it's not good for women, and it's not good for the climate. So Canada was one of the 12 founding members of the alliance in 1949, and our federal budget just released 5 days ago reaffirms Canada's commitment with hundreds of billions of dollars of Canadian taxpayer money demanded by NATO. So this is a text from our budget. This funding demonstrates Canada's unwavering commitment to NATO and will strengthen this country's capacity to respond to evolving global security challenges. And it continues to say that this is for collective defense and to help keep Canadians safe. My question is, what threats am I or Canadians currently facing that NATO can protect us from? Canada doesn't have foreign armies charging our borders, dropping bombs on us, sending in high-end weaponry to kill us. In fact, that is what NATO is doing to civilians in other countries. On the other hand, if Canadians keep bombing people in ruthless bombing campaigns, killing civilians and destroying infrastructure, are we not making enemies that would want to harm our country? So currently I am in Toronto, Canada, living on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I am not supposed to leave my home because our hospitals are overrun with COVID-19 patients. They are shipping patients without their consent to other hospitals that have a few beds to spare. This provincial government is unwilling to give paid sick days for people who get COVID-19. And our frontline workers are being sacrificed because of politics and the misallocation of public funds to weapons and NATO instead of health and support to Canadians. So when I hear that to comply with NATO demands, our tax dollars are going to weapons companies, I think, what could we use that money for? Could we offer free post-secondary education? Yes. Could we finally lift all of the boil water advisories on First Nations reserves and upgrade their infrastructure? Yes. Could we support Canadians who are currently working in fossil fuels by giving them retraining in renewables, the renewable economy? Yes. So we are less of a strong, healthy, and caring country because we are trying to be a part of a club that we should have learned was not beneficial for us decades ago. As Matthew Behrens put in a recent article, the self-proclaimed feminist government of Justin Trudeau continues to devote almost $32 billion annually, the largest share of federal discretionary spending, to an organization whose foundational culture is built on a hatred of women. So Canada's top military authorities are being investigated, and polling suggests the majority of Canadians believe the sexualized and exploitive culture in the military needs to be addressed. Behrens suggests withholding funds from them until they enact effective changes, and I couldn't agree more. The Canadian government says that it is feminist, but it still sells arms to Saudi Arabia. It says that it supports women, but why have sexual assaults from the highest military authorities been allowed to be buried, women silenced, and their careers destroyed? The military says it would like more women to apply, yet women in the military are twice as likely to be assaulted in their careers than women outside of the military. Women are being encouraged to go into the military without a reasonable standard of safety of not being attacked by their fellow officers, and this is not the battle they signed up for. By pouring money into the highly male-dominated military without matching investments in women-dominated fields, we can see that the priority is to be in the NATO club, not to be feminist. So people within NATO countries are not the only ones paying for NATO's militarism. Even if people aren't bombed by Canadians, the greenhouse gas emission produced by carbon-intensive weaponry is highly toxic, and with catastrophic climate change already being felt, weapons purchases are injustices to the global society as a whole. In fact, the militaries within NATO countries are the largest institutional emitters of carbon. NATO is not a collective defense organization. It is a global threat to our livable world and future. So in conclusion, because of NATO and its ridiculous requirement to spend 2% of GDP on weapons and the military, Canada is less able to deal with our current crises like the pandemic that is raging through communities, forcing us into isolation and causing around 50 deaths a day. Even with the exorbitant budget of the military, they can't adequately investigate sexual assaults where victims feel justice has been served. and the lack of investment in women's jobs exacerbates inequality in Canada and slows down the she-covery. The real security threats that Canada faces are that NATO will rob us, everyday Canadians, of our emergency preparedness, of education, of clean water, and other tax spending benefits because of its unyielding devotion to militarism and the belief that bigger guns create more security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Now let's go ahead and hear from Dirk, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dirk Hogenkamp. I'm a medical student in the Netherlands. I'm the European student representative of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and I'm also a board member of the Dutch affiliate of that. I think we already have heard some very good points against NATO, for example, the tremendous kind of money that cannot go to any other public spending because it's disappearing in the military industrial complex and stuff like that. But I think the key issue is for me that NATO is a nuclear alliance. Europe is in a weird situation, as it is overrepresented by NATO and it is overrepresented by nuclear weapons. There are 20 states in Europe that are member of NATO, but there are also many nuclear weapon states there. Russia, of course, is the biggest, but also the UK and France. But there are also, as Lucy already mentioned, in contradictory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, American bombs in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Belgium, in Italy, and also in Turkey. In the Netherlands, there are about 20 of those bombs at Volkel Air Base, which puts the Netherlands in a difficult situation. The previous Dutch government has said that it will do its best to work towards a nuclear weapon-free world, but, and there comes this thing, within the obligations of their alliances, and those alliances, of course, they mean the NATO. NATO has said, whenever you ask them about it, they always say, as long as there are nuclear weapons, we will remain a nuclear alliance. And this seems like a paradox, but actually it's not a paradox. It just means that they don't have the intention to work towards nuclear disarmament. Even though that all those countries have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this treaty in it has Article 6, which obliges these countries to work towards a global zero of nuclear weapons. I think that the effect is not, as it's been taking too long now. The treaty there is already for 50 years, and there are still really many nuclear weapons here. And then there can also be things said about those nuclear sharing missiles. When Lucy already said they are B-61 bombs, that means that they are free fall bombs that have to be dropped from an airplane. In the Netherlands and in Germany, Italy, and Belgium too, those are on, for example, in the Netherlands, a Dutch airbase, and when the Americans give the order, they have to be flown by Dutch fighter pilots with Dutch fighter jets. Parliament was never consulted about this, so it's undemocratic, but also the Netherlands has given up its own statehood for it's now a state actor of the USA, and those weapons cannot reach anywhere beyond our own NATO borders actually. So the only thing that it can do is bring enormous havoc to Europe and to our own so enormously densely populated country. As long as these weapons are still here and we are threatening to use it, we are doing something that I think is completely immoral. Just only having them, only saying that we are willing to use these weapons means that we are willing to take the risk of destroying indiscriminately the lives and the nature, our livelihood of our own continent here in Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Derek. And thank you for each of the panelists for answering that first question. Now, the second question will be more related. Well, some of you already have mentioned why it will be important to abolish NATO, but if maybe you would like to answer that more deeply in this second question, that will be fine. But in the second question, we want to focus more on actions or strategies that we could take as youth to counter NATO. So let's start hearing first from Lucy, please.
Thank you. So this summit is in response to the NATO Youth Leaders Report on NATO 2030, where a group of young people suggested ways to make the strategic vision of NATO more relevant and applicable to our generation, and to bring in concerns which are prevalent among under 30s. Before this summit, I did a bit of digging around NATO's youth engagement, who they were getting involved with, and most importantly, why young people were keen to engage with them. Now, a good chunk of this is about money, and we shouldn't shy away from that. NATO has obviously much more money and more resources generally than the peace movement. But inviting young people in to help with your strategy to generation-proof the organisation is actually a really good idea. NATO have invited young people to speak right to their heart. This isn't a youth conference which happens before the real conference, as we so often see in the anti-nuclear movement. And it's not an underfunded and sidelined youth wing. It's placing emphasis on integrating the views of young people into the way the whole organisation is run. Now, obviously, I don't think much of the findings of the report, and I don't agree with NATO's mission to militarise further and harder. It particularly doesn't make for great reading seeing young people advocating for an environmental policy which is almost completely greenwashing and doesn't account for the huge impact of the military on the climate. But I do think that the peace movement has something to learn here in terms of how it speaks and engages and integrates the youth voice. How often have you been to a youth conference which happens entirely separately from the main conference and then doesn't get integrated into the summary and recommendations of the event? Or being part of a youth wing which doesn't get any say over the policy and direction of the main movement? This happens to me all the time. How much louder do you find yourself having to advocate, even within the movement, to get your voice heard as a young person? It's not just a question of how much money we have, it's much more profound than that. It's about who's in the room when organisational policy is written. It's about who gets a say over campaigns and communications. It's about finding innovative ways for people to actively engage with and have ownership of our movement, not just asking for donations, because this strategy doesn't by and large reach young people. So, number one, the movement needs to make space for young people with whatever resources it has. Number two, we need to flip the narrative about NATO. We're lost in our own jargon. The search for peace and justice is not a complicated message, and it's not something that should come across as discredited or naive. It's a simple and sensible message. More weapons do not make us more safe. More militarism does not make us more safe. But we lose sight of how simple and how credible that message is, because as a movement, we tend to get caught up in policy jargon and activist speak. So we need to go back to basics and appeal to disillusioned young people globally who are looking for a simple message of unity and peace to get behind, but look at our movement as it stands and see acronyms and jargon. We need to resist the monopoly on credibility which NATO has built and start restoring the simple and sensible message on which the movement was founded. And finally, number three, we need to talk to each other. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I really want to see more of this for a few reasons. One is that it can be really isolating being a young person in a movement which is lacking a concerted youth voice, and it doesn't always make space for its young people. And another is that campaigns people, policy people, and creatives do not talk to each other enough, in my experience in this movement. And we end up in a situation where policy people are churning out endless reports calling for more reports. Campaigns people churn out messaging that doesn't adapt to the current moment or key into current events. And creatives aren't able to serve our movement even if they want to, because they aren't at the decision-making table. So let's talk to each other, and let's talk simply, because our heart for peace will shine through so much more strongly if we speak with a united voice which goes back to the very heart of what we believe.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy. Amazing intervention. Now let's go and hear from Lucas.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lucy, for your powerful words. for me, NATO is a very strong and resilient organization, and we are at the beginning of a struggle with much less resources and strength than this organization. So I try to be realistic what can be done. And for me, the main point is to delegitimize NATO. You know, when you look at the facts, it is obvious that NATO is obsolete and that NATO is not what it stands for. This you can see just by the sheer numbers of military spending. When you refer it to the current COVID crisis, it is very obvious where money needs to be spent. Also what security means. It's not military security, but human security. So I think these are points we can use and delegitimize NATO. The same with the environmental crisis and the climate crisis. War is the total destruction of environment. You know, it can never be sustainable, no matter what Stoltenberg and the NATO 2030 report now says, that NATO wants to be more sustainable. This is a huge joke. It just cannot be. It doesn't make any sense. So this is something we also need to use much more, and in the sense of Lucy, also talk to other organizations and other movements. We need to get in contact with the environmental movements. There's a lot of young people which are unfortunately lacking in the peace movement, or are not so present in the peace movement. So I think this is a very important point for networking with other movements. I'm quite sure you have much more examples from your own backgrounds with other movements, which we should also connect to. A third point is the TPNW. I think this is such a great momentum in time right now. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to make really a change. And I think we all need to continue to work on this. The TPNW was a United Nations process, so it's highly democratic. It's what the majority of countries in this world want to have. 122 countries negotiated it and agreed on it. And I think NATO cannot stand in the way of this. They have the responsibility within the NPT to disarm nuclear and conventionally. So we need to make sure that we take them by their word. And it's, for me, small steps of communication. It's arguing continuously, kind of like Don Quixote. That's the situation I feel myself in. It's a fight against windmills, but it has to be done. With the TPNW, one last point connected for me is also the strengthening of the United Nations system. NATO for decades now has been sidelining the United Nations. They want to play this collective security system, which they are not, but they claim to be, or would love to be it. So this whole idea of global NATO is something where I see also an angle that this is something undemocratic and undermining of the best institution we have, the United Nations, even though it's not perfect, but it's the best we have. Last, NATO announced that June 14th will be the next NATO summit in Brussels. There will be activities. We will see, well, counter activities. We will see what it will be. It will probably be very decentralized. Yeah, depending on the local situation with COVID, what is possible, what is not possible. But there will be a lot of online events. So please have this date in mind, or this week in mind, and maybe we can agree to organize webinars with youth and non-youth, in this week or around the state to also show our protest against NATO. And one last and final comment or information, IPB is organizing a second World Summit or World Conference, they call it. It will take place in Barcelona from 15th to 17th October. It follows what Lucy was mentioning. It follows the approach of bringing youth into the conference. So there's not, I don't know, a youth conference and then a normal conference or regular conference, but it is one. So I think this is also an opportunity to continue networking and to continue dialogue and discussing. And we should also think how to create more events like this. It's on us to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Lucas, for mentioning about the IPB World Congress. I was going to mention it at the end of the event, but now you have mentioned it. So if anyone interested, we will be sharing the link to register, or you can check about what's the event about. And if you are interested, more than welcome to register. So now let's go ahead and hear from Vanessa.
Thank you, Angelo. And I want to thank the very thoughtful comments by Lucy and Lucas. So well, as I hoped I hammered into everyone from my previous answer, how important it is for Canada and the rest of the members to leave NATO, it is imperative on us as youth because we are the ones that are going to have to pick up the pieces. Without the investments in social services of people who are at risk right now, we are going to spend a lifetime of walking by people on the street who are homeless and are asking for change. So we need to be that change. The overarching theme of this is disarmament, and hope for us as youth is disarmament. We cannot afford 2% of GDP for weapons in the military. We cannot afford the carbon exemptions that the military enjoys, and we have to use everything we can to disarm the military industrial complex. So Canadian citizens do not receive increased security benefits from being in this aggressive military organization. In fact, it is putting our soldiers, Canadians, and everyone at risk. Our international reputation as peacekeepers to many Canadians seems to be intact, but I doubt this will last much longer. Our wars and bombing campaigns have meant that we cannot claim that title anymore, which is a sense of our national pride. Currently, we have around 42 to 47 peacekeepers and over 100,000 people in the military. The Canadian Foreign Policy Institute says that Canada, since NATO's inception, has contributed around 90% of its military efforts to NATO. And from the budget and how Canada talks about military spending, we are really trying to say to stay in the military club, even though we have no threats of our own. We have been riding on our peacekeeper illusion for decades. I met a young woman the other day who says she was in the womb when her mother was in Serbia protesting NATO's bombing. And not unlike today in the pandemic, they couldn't leave their house and only one person could leave to get rations for the household while NATO bombed her country. Because their country was in shambles, they moved to Canada. So as you can see, like, we create refugees by bombing communities and then limit their migration to our country, which is not being bombed, and they're forced to assimilate and usually into low-paying jobs despite having decently well-off lives in their previous countries with credentials that we don't recognize. So let's get to the action part. I think the first step for youth is to not see this as an intimidating high-level policy discussion, because it's actually very simple. There are 50 people around me dying every day from COVID-19. Small businesses are dropping off the map. People are being evicted from their homes because they can't pay rent. We all know where we want to see our tax dollars, and I'm willing to bet that high-end carbon-intensive warfighting machines are not on that list for a majority of people. So we need to be louder and not afraid to call out our politicians on Twitter. We need to write op-ed articles, email the editor personally of news media outlets. If you see no coverage of military spending at the time of an economic recession, pandemic, and mounting financial hardships, and they are not reporting on increased spending and weapons procurements. We need to call them out and say that this is an erosion of public trust in the media, because they are not reporting on basic knowledge that citizens should know about, namely where their tax dollars are going. But unfortunately, we as youth, we have a difficult job of taking on the military industrial complex and promoting disarmament with limited time, limited funds, and if I'm to be honest, limited energy. If you are interested in world peace, then chances are you have about 30 different causes that you are currently working on, and I'm with you. And I feel your burnout, which is why we must make it creative and fun. So we as youth are gifted or burdened with increasing technological advances. And what I'm hoping to see is more content on peace. We all know we need to spread awareness, but how? We have to make it something that people want to watch, that people want to be a part of. We have to make discussing difficult issues of war and the prospects for peace fun and relevant. So yesterday was my last day of a 14-day fast. I didn't eat for 14 days along with another peace activist in opposition to Canada's proposed purchase of 88 fighter jets. 1 hour of operation of just one of these jets is approximately 50,000 Canadian dollars, or the annual salary of a new nurse. Because of this, I've received 2 interview requests for my hardship, but if going without food is not in your future, we need flash mobs, we need TikTok dances, we need peace cocktail recipes, we need sassy needlepoint, we need graphics, we need music, we need poetry, and anything else you can think of, we need to be throwing it all at NATO. So the mental trauma and anxiety that youth are facing right now is immeasurable. But if it does anything, I hope that it reaffirms our need to invest in social services. We simply can't afford militarism or NATO anymore. We must invest in peace and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for those encouraging words. So now let's go ahead and hear from Derek.
Thank you. Yeah, very good question. We already heard a lot of things, and I could speak about it for hours. So I'll just keep to what I said in from what I answered to your first question. And that's my analysis that the biggest problem is that NATO is a nuclear alliance. Like Lucas already said, I think a very big opportunity at this moment is the TPNW, the United Nations ban treaty on nuclear weapons, and it depends on where you live, on what you can do. If you live in NATO countries that do not host nuclear weapons or are not nuclear weapon states, I think it's very important to pressure your government and your parliament, so the old-fashioned lobbying, that they stop opposing the TPNW. A lot of NATO countries are opposing the TPNW, and often with invalid arguments. For example, saying that that it opposes the non-proliferation treaty, which it does not. It only strengthens Article 6 of the non-proliferation treaty, that the signatories are bound to work towards the global zero. So that's the first thing. But if you live in countries that host those nuclear weapons, like I do, I think that's an important step to work there on. For example, the Netherlands cannot join the TPNW in this moment because they still have nuclear weapons on their soil, and I think that it is important to work against this so-called nuclear sharing. So nuclear sharing is what we call having the weapons of a nuclear state on your soil and deploying them, and I think this is where we need to work more together and make it an international movement, because it's not just a problem of Dutch citizens that those weapons are at Volkel Air Base. Of course, it makes us either war criminals or it makes us victims. But it's just a problem for our neighbors as well, because they are also more at risk of that a conflict might escalate to a nuclear war because those bombs are here, or that those weapons might explode. So I think that is where we need more international collaboration. Last summer, I went for the first time to a protest at Büchel Air Base. So that's the air base in Germany where there are 20 B-61 bombs. And every year in Germany, they have their protest. It lasts for weeks, and it's a wonderful thing to visit. And I think that we from all over Europe should go there and join those protests against the nuclear sharing that is happening there. And it inspired me to also organize a protest at Volkel Air Base, so the air base in the Netherlands. I hope there will be one in Belgium this year too. So then we'll have protests in Germany, in the Netherlands, and in Belgium. And we should visit all of them. So it's not the Germans have the German protest, the Dutch have the Dutch protest, the Belgians have the Belgian protests. But wherever we are from, we should, in solidarity, also protest against the bombs in Germany, also against the bombs in Belgium, also against the bombs in the Netherlands. And I think that movement has momentum too, because, as Vanessa said, there are a lot of digital opportunities, and I think it's really important to use it. And we need to make it, of course, also fun, because it's sometimes difficult to stay motivated. But what I'm also seeing in my generation is that people are maybe done with the Facebook activism, and that they are ready to also stand for their ideologies in the real world. And I'm hoping to see those movements grow with young people who go to protests again. And I hope that will lead to what is probably the third tactic that we need to deploy against the nuclear sharing, and that is that it has to that it also has to make the mass news. Just like Vanessa already said, there is no public debate, not even information about it really in the news. Most people in the Netherlands don't even know that we have nuclear weapons here, but it's so important topic, and we're not debating it. It's not discussing. People don't even know it, and when people don't even know it, you will never get civil unrest or people moving against it. So I think that's the most important thing, and I hope that those demonstrations can help that, we all are very good at what we do, but that we also reach beyond the people who support us, that we get it, that we also get on television, and that we get in newspapers. So I think those are the three most important things. So to conclude, the old-fashioned lobbying, to have international demonstrations and working together over borders, and reaching mass media. And if I can say one more thing, if people want to also think about it and how they can help, coming Tuesday, I think the International Peace Bureau is hosting a meeting on ending nuclear sharing in Europe.
Thank you very much, Derek. Yes, you are right. IPB is hosting this event. You can check all the events that the International Peace Bureau is organizing in our website in www.ipb.org. So thank you so much for all the interventions from the panelists. Now let's open the floor for questions or comments. So if anyone has got any question, you can go ahead and speak, or if you have any comments, more than welcome to do it. So does anyone has any question or comment?
Yeah, hello.
Yes, hello, go ahead.
This is Godwin Okoko. I'm calling in from Nigeria. For me, I think it's an interesting conversation, and I happen to quite learn a lot from what young people are doing across the world. And I'm truly inspired by the acts of Vanessa specifically, especially in relation to ensuring that we see that we live in a world without wars. And I think this is great. I'm just trying to see that how also can we learn from best practices in this kind of pursuit as relates to Africa, specifically, of course, looking at the growing, especially in the West African region, the increasing growing tensions, conflict, violence, and so many issues that are totally akin to the human society. How can we also learn from some of your strategies to seek to de-escalating violence in communities, and of course, addressing issues of terrorism and other forms of violence? Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't put on my video because the network here is quite poor. Just lying on my bed to join this, and in case you just want to look at my face, I'm sure you can see me a little. I don't know. So thank you very much. Just if anybody want to share with any experiences that can cover around Africa, specifically Nigeria. I live in northern part of Nigeria.
Thank you. So any of our speakers would like to answer to this question?
Hi, maybe I'll start. Godwin, thanks for coming on. I know that the internet can be a little bit tricky. I lived in Tanzania for 6 months, and I lived in Ghana for a year, and the internet is beloved, but sometimes there are some tricks with it. So I think what we also have to be talking about, as Tamara Lawrence put in the chat, US, France, and Canada is militarizing Africa, but looking at the bigger picture of, NATO's 2% to weapons. These are carbon intensive weapons, and increasing climate change increases violence against women. It increases desertification, which increases conflict. When rivers dry up, when food becomes scarce, when families cannot afford to send their girl children to school because their farms are not producing a surplus, so they have none to sell, and that creates a generation of young women without jobs, without opportunities to go on to higher education and learn skills to be financially independent. So I think we have to really tackle climate change, and we have to hammer in the fact that militarized security is creating conflict all over the world without bombs. It's the greenhouse gas emissions that are going to be causing environmental refugees. I believe it was the UN that said by 2050, there are going to be hundreds of millions of people for environmental refugees. And we have to think about this as a global security threat. This is a global security threat that NATO cannot fight with bombs. In fact, that makes it worse. And so we have to look at our country's spending on humanitarian aid. We need to look at no strings attached investments in the green economy for developing countries, and even more well-developed countries or less developed countries. We need to make sure that we are not causing the refugee crisis to be even worse, because we in the West, in Canada, we are the most polluting country in the world, and Canadians don't know that, they don't believe that, but it's true. And so I think we really need to hammer in that environmental sustainability means more peace in the world. We need to make those connections, and we need to make it so that the conditions for terrorism and extremist violence are not fertile. We need to give everybody a decent way of life and hope and opportunity for the future, so that they have opportunities and can make decisions for themselves, and they are not forced to become under control of terrorist or extremist violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. So I'm not sure if any other panelists would like to take the word. Go ahead, Lucas.
No, I would like to add the economic perspective on this. NATO, in its preamble, says that they want to protect the Western way of life, basically, the economic system, the Western societies. And this includes the economies. And we are a highly exploitative economy that externalizes costs and exploits the one planet that we are living on towards its destruction. And I think this has to change tremendously. Sustainability is, or a more sustainable way of living is one component of it, but directly attached to it is social justice and economic justice. And for me, from my limited experience with Africa, this is a perspective that Europe doesn't have on Africa, and probably the Western world doesn't have on Africa. So I agree that it's about creating equal chances for everybody on this planet to live a decent life. And this is something that NATO wants to prevent from happening, because they want to keep the Western societies the way they are, in a neoliberal or extremely liberal economic system that exploits other parts of the world and exploits a large quantity of people living in this world. And so I think this is also an aspect that should be explored a little more and maybe discussed a little more. What the implementations of such an economy and of such a lifestyle is for people in Nigeria, for you, and how this connects to inner conflicts in Africa or in Nigeria, in your country, and in other countries as well, because there are links. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucas. So I don't know if we have any other question, any other comment maybe from the public, or anyone else would like to take the word.
I think there were 3 or 2 questions in the chat.
I can't see the chat, unfortunately, but will that people be able to say the question, to ask the question? Or if anyone can see it, can read it, please.
I found one. It's from Yuri. Should I just read it?
Yes, read it, please.
My question, and each of the panel members can answer this, is Volodymyr Zelensky, the current leader of Ukraine, has in recent weeks done a complete 180-degree turn in seeking détente with Russia and bringing peace and reconciliation between Ukrainians of different linguistic, ethnic backgrounds. He is gunning for joining NATO. Is this because of pressure from NATO nations and the fact that Western-backed ultra-Ukrainian neo-Nazis and parties that are still dominant since the Euromaidan protests, or was he just another con artist?
Well, would you like anyone to answer the question, any of the panelists?
You know, I haven't really followed recent events in the Ukraine. I have 3 kids and I'm quite preoccupied with the COVID situation here in Germany. But from my understanding, NATO has a strong interest since the upheavals in Ukraine starting in 2014 for Ukraine to become a NATO member. And I also think that the European Union has an interest to establish relations to the Ukraine. So for me, it's not surprising that we are in the situation that we are in right now. But I don't have much more details than this. But for me, it's clear that since 2014, Ukraine is on the map for NATO.
Thank you, Lucas. So I'd like to know if any other panelists would like to answer. Yes, go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, I'm a bit out of my depth here. I'm not very good up to date with what's going on in the Ukraine. But what I can add to what Lucas said is that NATO can be seen as very offensive in the way that it is growing. For example, the Clinton made the promise after the fall of the Soviet Union that those countries would not join the NATO, but for the Baltic states that has happened, for example, and I can't look inside the heads of some world leaders, and sometimes you wonder if there's anything inside actually, but I think that some of them see that as being as that it is actually as that they see it as a risk, as an offensive thing, that because they are losing buffer countries. And at the moment, the Ukraine is in the very unfortunate position of being the buffer between East and West, and between countries that are not really on speaking terms at the moment. I think for that reason, that Ukraine joining the NATO is very unlikely. They already talk about it for a very long time. It hasn't happened yet, and I think that the conflict going on within its borders would put too much risk on NATO because of NATO's own Article 5, that if there is somewhere a war with one of its allies, that then it's a war against all the countries that are part of the NATO. So that's all I can add to it. That's yeah.
Thank you, Dirk. Okay, so I don't know if we have any other question or any other comment from anyone in the public.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I'm a political science student at Colorado State University, and so, you know, living in the United States, I obviously share all of the same concerns that everybody's been sharing. Our military budget is absolutely absurd. The economic, catastrophe that Vanessa was mentioning with climate refugees and, you know, everybody talking about this border crisis, et cetera, et cetera. I'm relatively new kind of getting into this stuff, and I'm kind of finding my passions and my footing in, you know, the peace movement, so to speak. And I'm wondering what advice you guys have for just kind of, networking and kind of getting embedded in some organizations that are dedicated to these causes. that we all care about so much, especially with the limited social contact of the pandemic.
Thank you very much for the question, Garrett. So any of our speakers would like to answer the question? Go ahead, please, Derek.
Well, nice to meet you, Garrett, and wonderful that you want to get involved. That's really great to hear. What I think is important is that you find a place that it should give you energy, because the peace work, it drains energy because you do it in your spare time and stuff, but and the results may take a while before they become visible. So I think that's my biggest advice. Find a club where you enjoy the things that you can do, and then it will go very quickly, I think. But it is difficult now with COVID, and for example, I'm the only Dutch whole student within the IPPNW movement at the moment. So it is difficult to find young new members, and in some places the peace movements can be a place of old hippies. Yeah, don't let that scare you off. And then just start somewhere, and you find that that is the point where you can from then on meet a lot of people, and a lot of opportunities they roll on your path. You don't have to put much work into it, so just get started.
Thank you very much, Derek. Well, I wanted to add something to it. I started since I was like 11 years old to be interested in peace issues, as I come from Colombia, a country that's been dealing with a conflict with a 50 years long conflict, more than 50 years. But I started to care about more international issues, attending the first summit of the International Peace Bureau in 2016. This one was in Germany. So my advice would be definitely to extend the invitation for you to get involved with the second IPB World Congress. In that Congress, pretty much will be lots of different organizations with tackling different issues. So there you can get like a sort of glimpse of what interests you the most, or what will be that passion, or what do you want to focus on. So that's a really good way to connect with organizations. Even in the United States as well, doing a research, there are lots of different organizations that you can reach out to in case you want to get like more involved in the peace movement. So that would be sort of my advice. I'm not sure if any other speaker would like to answer that question.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things that I would like to say. I think it's easy to assume that COVID has made everything harder, but I don't think this would be happening if COVID wasn't happening. So actually there's lots of opportunities as well, for especially kind of international networking, kind of getting outside of the circles where we'd normally move. And I think actually that's a really exciting opportunity. I hope it's something we continue to see for many years in the future, even after COVID is less of a dominant force in our lives. I think as a kind of young person, it can feel like you're a bit kind of out of place sometimes in the movement, or like you feel like you don't know enough things, or you kind of need to read more and more and more until you've kind of got a voice and a place in the movement. And I just want to say, like, straight off the bat, that's absolutely not true. You don't need to get involved in peace work. You just need to know that you think that militarism does not make the world a more secure place, and that's all you need to know. And don't let people scare you into thinking that you need to read more or know more. You just need to be an advocate and wield power. Where you have power, you need to use it, and that might be like in your uni, or it might be with your mum and dad, or it might be kind of at your local community organizing meeting. And the final thing I wanted to say is, don't assume that the group already exists. Sometimes the group doesn't exist and you need to make it happen yourself. And for example, in the UK, we don't really have a youth network of people who are involved in this. So me and a few other people have literally just set it up because it just doesn't exist. And for a while I was like, oh, I must be missing it. It must be somewhere. It just doesn't exist. And so sometimes you just need to be like, I want this to happen. And if you care about it and you know one or two other people who care about it as well, there are loads of people who will join you and you will be unstoppable and it will be amazing. Best of luck.
Thank you. Go ahead, Vanessa. I think you're next.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see new people coming into the movement. And, you know, once you do get your footing, I just want to caution you that not all of your friends are going to come to your webinars, or not every single one of your friends is going to use their Saturday to hold up signs outside of City Hall or something like that. Don't let it discourage you. And like what was echoed before, and what Lucy was saying, you know, COVID-19 has stopped a lot of things, but it has also made international networking a lot easier so that you can find a community anywhere in the world right now. So that's kind of nice. It's a silver lining, I guess. But yeah, not to get discouraged. If you are passionate about it, you know, there's actually no other way. I find the peace movement just kind of sucks you in and it doesn't let you go. And that's why you have so many old hippies, as Dirk was saying. So yeah, I think just trying to find your people and people that give you strength, because we all know what we're advocating for, which is, you know, clean water, food, non-violence, other people not getting bombed. These are all good things. So coming back to that, and finding your groundedness, your roots within that, hopefully will give you strength, because it can be a little bit daunting and a little bit overwhelming. As Lucy was saying, there is a lot to know, but then you also have your own personal truths that you know, that we've always known. So there's strength in that. And I just want to say, try to get your friends in, because we need more youth. We need a NATO strategy for intergenerational sustainability. So we need to get more youth involved.
Thank you, Vanessa. Okay, so I don't know if there is any other question, maybe from the public or any other comment. Well, it seems that oh, go ahead, please.
Angelo, maybe it might be nice, and maybe even the audience has an answer to this too, but I'm interested in current youth activities against NATO and against militarization around the world. And I wonder if people have any interesting ideas that either they are doing or that they've noticed that maybe we can share and learn from each other.
Yeah, thank you. If anyone interested in sharing, go ahead, please.
You know, I think this is also something that we have to organize ourselves. I think, Lucy, you were the one pointing it out quite well. If there doesn't exist a group, you have to form one. I mean, thanks to Angelo that he took the first initiative to organize this summit or this meeting here. And I think it's really worthwhile to continue it and to build on it, and maybe to have a next one mid-June in 2 months. I'm not really aware of fundamental critics to NATO by youth. There's the No to War, No to NATO network. We will be organizing events usually for the last couple of, since 2009 for NATO summits, we have been organizing alternative summits or counter summits and different forms of protest, demonstrations and so on. And I think it's worthwhile that we organize something either as No to NATO Youth Network or No to NATO or in whatever constellation again in 2 months and try to do this more frequently. I think it's worthwhile to exchange and to learn from each other. And maybe, Garrett, this is also an interesting, or could be an interesting networking process for you to be able to join us and others frequently to discuss NATO or to come together and discuss in these webinar formats. So I would say we have to do it.
Thank you, Lucas. Yes, completely agree with you. I mean, the main idea of this is really to, I mean, as the NATO summit happens every year, usually middle June or May. So the idea is to continue this network, the network of Youth Against NATO, and organize actions. Well, unfortunately, this time we have to do the actions like virtually due to COVID-19, but normally actions are organized around the city where the NATO summit takes place. So the idea will be to involve more young people in the movement against NATO, as this really doesn't exist. So the main idea is to create a youth network against NATO. So I completely agree on that initiative of having a next webinar or next meeting by middle of June when the NATO summit is taking place. So if anyone would like to be involved, just go ahead and type your email on the chat so we can go ahead and recollect all your emails, and then we can start to build from there. I think someone has requested to speak. I think it's Alexander, so let's go ahead and hear from him.
Hi, I just want to try whether you can hear my voice. Do you hear my voice? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah. It has been asked whether there are other movements against NATO with young people and non-young people. I'm from Austria. Austria is still a neutral country, and it is not a neutral country at the same time because it's part of the PFP, the Partnership for Peace, which is a NATO organization. But most of the Austrians are against NATO, and we have now a new series of interesting anti-NATO and anti-EU organizations in Austria, like the Communist Party, which is very weak now in Vienna, but the Communist Party of the southern province of Styria is very active. The Solidarity Workshop, the Party of Labour, and the anti-imperialist organization, just to quote some of them, this concrete new organizations who are very active in order to maintain neutrality, to fight for a more active neutrality, because we are in this very happy situation to be neutral, and this should mean in itself that neutrality, the status of neutrality, is not compatible with NATO, which means at the same time that neutrality is being used by the official politicians to calm down, to calm the people, to make them, to silence them. We are neutral. What those NATO questions are not interesting, are not relevant for us. So why should be active against NATO? Now there are some groups who are dealing with neighboring countries. And it's very important to understand that not only in your own country, the fight against NATO is important and relevant, but also in the neighboring countries. Now, the situation in the neighboring countries of Austria is disastrous. In Hungary, there was a very strong movement against NATO about 20 years ago. They lost, but they were strong. In Slovakia, you have only 3 very small communist organizations who are against NATO. They gather every year in one of the places, famous places of Bratislava, which is the capital of Slovakia, and they protest against NATO. And the fascists also are against NATO, but we shouldn't mingle with them. In Czechia, the movement was stronger some years ago. In Italy, the movement against NATO is the most important, the strongest movement of, as I think, of all the movements in apart Greece, of course, because they know what NATO means. But in Italy, there is a new movement, and new movements, and they are very. You cannot understand. You cannot understand the weakness and the problems and the conflicts of your own political movements if you do not socialize politically and at the European level with all the other anti-NATO movements. Montenegro, for example. Montenegro is a country which has fought for neutrality, which is still a very, very strong anti-NATO organization. Very few people know about that. They were in Brussels, by the way, some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. So we try to protest now. We're starting, because every day I'll finish with that, you know, I'm talking too much, but every day weapons from Germany, tanks are crossing the Austrian border, which juridically is a violation of the Austrian law of neutrality, ahead to turning towards Slovenia, which is a neighboring country in the south, or they come from Slovenia, and they go to Hungary. This has been the case for many years. So Austria is a territory of transport of genocide. And you know, everybody among us knows who will be the main victim of this genocide. It will be the Russians. That's what. Without being necessarily pro-Russian, we know that the main victim of this future coming war will be the Russians, and Austria is one of the dangerous territories which part with the lie of being so neutral. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, we are just about to end, just in 2 minutes. We are about to finish this. It's been a long session. Thank you, everybody. There is something else we would like to do. We would like to take a picture. If anyone is willing maybe to turn on the camera, you're welcome. If you don't, that's absolutely fine. And if you have any sign, maybe saying no to NATO or Youth Against NATO, invited also to hold it for the picture. And then we will be reaching out to those who shared your email in regards to a second webinar, maybe by middle June, as Luke has proposed. So I have read this one, and if anyone ready, please share. We will be taking 3 pictures, just 3 shots. Jessica, let us know when you have taken the pictures, please.
It's okay. Thank you, everyone.
Already? Okay. Okay, so, well, that was it. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this summit.